question is, was Jesus a racist? It's a great question, isn't it? It's amazing how in our culture right now, you can label something and then you start to look for constructs to fit that. Now suddenly there are people that are bringing this up and trying to say that Jesus, he wasn't who he said he was, and he was racist and prejudiced, and that he was going to the Jews only at first, and a Gentile woman changed his mind, and all of that. And the thing is there's no scriptural evidence for that. Now let me first. There's a saying that fish. And you feed a man for a day, teach a man to fish, and he can feed himself for a lifetime. And I think this is very, very true when it comes to the scriptures. So let me go from general to specific. Everything that you hear me talk about is context. So when you hear someone say something, first of all, you have to ask, what's their context? And then you have to take the scriptures and put it back in the context of not only where it was written, what was said, and then not only the context of that specific book, and I'm talking about the book of the New Testament, the particular book that it was written in. Like each of the Gospels has a different emphasis. Matthew emphasizes Jesus as King of the Jews, which is why they trace his lineage. Matthew traces his lineage as a Jew, and it's quite interesting to see how these things fit together. Luke, the Dr. Luke, he gives a few more specifics about Jesus' birth and the shepherds, but then he's got the first recorded interaction of Jesus with Gentiles in the wise men coming to visit, because they were not Jews, and they were the ones who provided the money for the trip. So you've got to understand the context. Everybody now seems to like to, if the minute you say something, they will label you a racist. And even if you say, I'm not a racist, they then say, well, you're a racist because you're saying you're not a racist. You have to go further than that. Let me just say this, first of all. We all, as human beings, have a sense of prejudice. There is racism and prejudice within each separate community. There's prejudice with Floridians towards other people. There's prejudice in North Carolina towards Floridians. We've actually been called Floridiots, and we've been called, and then people that are from New York that went down to Florida and came back to North Carolina are known as halfbacks. Prejudice is part and parcel of who we are. There is prejudice in the white community. There is prejudice in the black community. There is prejudice in the Asian community. There's prejudice all the way around. Now, obviously, there's prejudice, and then there's flat out racism, where you try to eliminate an entire race of people, which the Jews certainly understood what that was all about. So this whole idea is you have to be careful. I don't get rattled if somebody decides that, because I know what's true and what isn't. But I also know I have blind spots of prejudice, and we all have them. Okay, so if you say you don't, you do, and being able to admit that is part of this. But we're all growing. So that's one thing. So you got to look at the context. The question about this was, Jesus in Matthew 10, when he first sent his disciples out, told them, I don't want you to go into the way of the Gentiles. Don't enter into any city of the Samaritans, but go only to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. This is fulfilling what Paul talked about in Romans when he said the gospel is going to the Jew first and then also to the Gentile. Jesus did not change his mind. The question comes about specifically when the Canaanite woman approached Jesus, and there was a debate that occurred. It almost seemed like a debate between them, where the woman asked for healing to occur, and Jesus made the comment about basically talking about referring to the Gentiles as dogs. Now the idea is that she was persistent in asking him for healing, and what happened was Jesus then turns around and says, it says, yeah, your faith has made you well. And then he looks around and he says, look, I haven't seen this kind of faith in Israel. The point of the story was not that Jesus suddenly shifted his attention from Jews to Gentiles. As a matter of fact, once he took the gospel to the Jews first in Matthew, you see him at the end of Matthew, and then also in the book of Acts, there is a marked shift that occurs in what is going to happen. Jesus in John 17 prays for all the disciples that will believe on him through the name of the current disciples. Then in Acts, when the disciples came to him and said, "Is this now you're going to restore the kingdom of Israel?" That's when he said, "It's not for you to know the times or the seasons. The Father has put at his own disposal." But he said, you're going to be witnesses of me. You receive power. You'll be witnesses unto me. And then he said, starting where? Jerusalem and Judea and Samaria and in the uttermost parts of the earth. So Matthew 10, don't go into the way of the Gentiles. Don't enter into any city of the Samaritans. Go lead the lost sheep of the house of Israel. Acts chapter 1, starting in Jerusalem, Jews, Judea, Jerusalem, Samaria, half Jews, uttermost parts of the earth, Gentiles. Good morning, Ken. So the idea of that was Jesus a racist? Of course, the answer is no. He was not a racist, but God chose the Jewish people first as the ones who the Messiah would come through his line. Now, let me add another little tidbit to this. Tamar and Ruth in the line of Jesus were also non-Jews. Just remember that. Jesus had non-Jews, in a sense, in his line. So to say that Jesus changed his mind and suddenly shifted things around and all that kind of stuff, that he repented and decided then to go to the Gentiles is not true at all. He had planned on going to the Gentiles all along, but the offer of the kingdom went to the Israelites and to the Jews first, and then he expanded it, but he healed people and he ministered to Gentile people. But then he told the disciples, look, you guys got to get out beyond your comfort zone. The problem with the prejudice was the disciples. They still had old constructs about Samaritans. Remember when Jesus ministered to the woman in Samaria, she was a half Jew. And was likely a prostitute. In John chapter 4, the disciples were like, well, what are you doing? What's going on here? Why are you talking to her? I mean, it was a woman. She was a woman. She was probably a woman of the night. She was a Samaritan. None of it jived, And so because of that, we see Jesus ministering to everybody. He didn't change his mind. It was the plan all along. But first, the offer of the kingdom went to, good morning, Bobby, went to the people of Israel first, and then spread out to the Gentiles. Now, the other question has to do with God being loving and then telling the disciples, if your God is good, why did he tell the Israelites to kill enemies, women, children, and even animals? Well, now, that question itself is interesting. And even the animals. What happened to women and children? This is where we're at in our society. We put animals over our women and children. Our priorities are really messed up. Anyway, I digress. Let me turn that off. I digress. Again, I'm going to quote Andy Stanley because he said it best. Jesus unhitched the Old Testament from the New Testament when he came. Now, before anybody and everybody went after Andy, he's trying to reach. And the challenge that we have again has to do with context. Context is everything. Let me say it again. Context is everything. Historical, cultural, lexical, syntactical, all of those things matter when it comes to interpreting the scriptures. In the Old Testament, remember that God was building a nation, not the church. when you hear people talk about the church, and we try to apply, for example, with all respect to my roots, there was always a discussion about storehouse tithing. I brought this up before. I'm going to back up again and answer this bigger question, but just as a minor misinterpretation, we would be quoted Malachi about bring all your tithes into the storehouse, saith the Lord, and I will unleash. First of all, while tithe meant 10%, a tithe often in the Old Testament was way more than 10%. Second, the storehouse was not the church because the church did not exist. The church was not instituted until years later. If you want to try to say the storehouse was the church, go ahead, but you can't make a doctrinal point of that because it wasn't around. Okay, so that's number one. So the question is, why does God tell them to go in and to wipe everything out? Well, first of all, Israel was a nation at war. They were a theocracy at that point. God was in charge of them. You know, this thing the other day I saw something and this is just based on America. I thought something that said "Make America Kind Again," and I read that and I got triggered, to put it in modern vernacular, because I don't want our soldiers to be kind if they're defending our freedom. I want them to have purpose. I want them to have reason. But this issue of we're just not kind, which sometimes means just let people walk all over you and let people walk in and all of that. God never, ever, ever operated like that. Meekness and weakness are two different things. So understand that in the Old Testament, God was building a nation. The people were immoral. They were unethical. They were, the people that they were wiping out is kind of like when we would, when we have gone in and have retaliated for certain inhumane things. These people were bad. There were some bad people, and so God told them, you need to take the land over. This is going to be your land. This is yours. Go get it. They're on it. Get them out. And so you can talk about it all you want to, but it was a nation at war. So it would be ludicrous to say to somebody now there's a thing called war crimes if things are not done according to the way they should be, but in defending your land and defending your freedom and taking what is yours as far as, or protecting what is yours. Let's say that differently. Protecting what is yours in war is much different than cold-blooded murder. There was, in the Old Testament, for example, there were all kinds of different rules about vengeance. One of the greatest messages I ever heard based on the Old Testament was about the cities of refuge. God had established cities of refuge where if somebody had accidentally killed another human being, in other words, manslaughter, it was something that wasn't intentional, it wasn't planned, there was an argument, there was a fight, somebody pushed somebody, like it happened out here a number of years ago. One old guy pushed another old guy. He hit his head on the parking stop and died. It was horrible. But the guy didn't intend to push him and kill him. He intended to push him out of the way, and the man tripped. Now, should he be held accountable for that? Well, yeah, you don't put your hands on another human being like that over a parking spot. But the fact of the matter is that it was manslaughter. And so if you accidentally took the life of another human being in an altercation and it was not your intent, the family could often come after the person to gain justice. But if they went to a city of refuge, if they got themselves to a city of refuge, they were protected in the city of refuge. Nobody could come and get them and pull them out. So it's quite interesting that you have cases like that. So when people want to take an event in the Old Testament and say, oh, look, they went in and wiped them out, when meanwhile, what was interesting was they also brought people in. For example, they went in and Jericho was wiped out. However, Rahab and her family were saved. And they were taken outside the gates and protected. So there also is this, I know people want to go about what about the Ten Commandments? Thou shalt not kill. Thou shalt not kill. Thou shalt not kill. Okay, well, first of all, it's murder. It's the Hebrew word has the idea of murder. You can't murder somebody else and take a human life and just plan on doing it. That's not it. That's not how this works. So you will see, and then you see the shift that occurs from the Old Testament to the New Testament. When Israel was taking the land, when God was establishing a government, when God was bringing them into the land, they were to continue to protect their land. And what's interesting is Israel has had to protect their land since then. Since then. You want to look at some of the wars, and you look at, and you don't believe that God is protecting Israel. I want you to take a look at the map and look at all the people around them that hate their guts. And here's this little tiny nation that is still surviving. In fact, became their own nation again in I think it was 1948. My history is escaping me at the moment, but Israel became a nation then. So and they're still fighting for their land even now. And you can argue about the political ramifications of it all you want to, but the fact of the matter is that God was building a nation, period, end of story. And so what people like to go to is, well, if God's, basically the philosophy behind that is if your God loves you, why is there so much pain in the world? Why is there so much stuff happening? There have been so many times when, for example, my kids fell off a bike, and you want to pick them back up and you want to be there, but they only learn sometimes by falling. We live in a fallen world. We live in a world that is marred by sin. Sin affects us in so many different ways. Our actions have consequences. There's a heaven, there's a hell, there's a head, there's a tails. There's a tail. Whatever I put out is going to come back. If I put out good things are going to come back. If I put out bad things are going to come back. People like to call it karma. They like to call it sowing and reaping, whatever you want to call it. But what you put out comes back. And so, and it may not come back right away. And sometimes you may be in the wrong place at the wrong time, and you may get falsely accused of stuff. It happens all the time. But we like to assign blame in that moment. We like to say, well, if God doesn't exist because there's pain in the world. Look, folks, I'm going to say this again. When you look at the scriptures, where there is no struggle, there is no story. I want to say that again. Where there is no struggle, there is no story. I have learned more from the struggles in my life than I have the successes. I've learned more from the painful moments than I have the moments of pleasure. It is so true that's exactly what happens. We learn more from those moments of struggle and pain than we do pleasure and success. It doesn't mean that we welcome the struggle. Yeah, I got struggle, I got pain. But understand that it's going to come in life, and I can look at it and go, look at this as there's going to be a lesson in this somewhere. There's going to ultimately be a blessing out of it. Out of the pain, out of those moments of tragedy often comes in a new trajectory. There you go. Out of tragedy often comes a new trajectory. And I think it's important to remember that. So this stuff that people like to ask, if there's a God, why it is the same question over and over, and they try to put people on the defensive. And I look and go, we live in an evil world. We live in a world of injustice, of pain, of people making mistakes, of people blowing it. We live in a world where there's people that are mentally ill. There's people that take guns and do things that they shouldn't do with them. They murder others. And the question is, in the middle of that pain, and in the middle, the bigger question is what are we going to do to make a difference? Those of us who know him, those of us who claim to be followers of Jesus, you can I'll look at all the other people that you're trying to defend yourself against and want to ask dumb questions, and you want to engage them on Twitter and social media, have at it. But the question has to do with your destiny. What is the difference that you are making in the world? You can argue about these points of theology all that you want to, but let me tell you, the sun's going to come up tomorrow. And there's going to be sunset today. The sun's going to come up again tomorrow. And the question is going to be, as another day passes, what difference did I make? What change did I make? What impact did I have? And you can try to argue, and some people, you're not going to argue anybody into the kingdom. It's just like you're not going to argue with somebody and convince them of your political position. You can take shots, you could talk about the other side, you could do any of that you want to, but you are not going to argue people into it. They're going to have to see you living it. And so we're not going to have all the answers to all of the questions. But people like to ask those questions because they are trying to justify in their mind why they don't want to believe, why they don't want to follow Jesus. It's kind of like we've talked about before, that people buy on emotion and justify with fact. So bottom line is that I may go buy a car, but I go in and I go, I smell the new car. I look at it, man, this looks really, really cool. This is a cool vehicle. I really like this vehicle. And then you look and it's got all the bells and whistles that you want, and you're thinking, okay, can I afford this? And then I ask the question, how fast does it go? But don't tell anybody. I said, how fast will it go? Oh my God, this thing's fast. It's one of those kind of things. And then I start to justify. I say, well, the payments are only going to be $975 a month for the next 15 years. So yes, that's what we do. We buy an emotion and we justify with fact. And so people emotionally, because they're angry at God, they're angry at somebody else in their life, and they've got to assign blame. So they assign the blame emotionally and then justify that with fact. Every one of us does it. That's why truth is truth, and that's why we have to go back to the scriptures and understand, first of all, understand and believe that what we read there is true. So if you have not done the research to understand that the scriptures are true, and again, you can fight all you want to, but look at the stories. Look at the stories of struggle and overcoming. Look at how, again, the story is simple, but it's not easy to follow Jesus. I mean, I can tell the story of the scriptures in a matter of minutes if I have to. God created man, put him in a utopia, put him in Eden, gave him everything that he could ever have or want. God said, I want you to worship me. I don't want you to worship one another. Don't eat of the tree that's in the middle of the garden. When you do, you'll die. Well, they did it. They died. They began the process of death that plunged the human race into struggles and wars and fighting and conflict and all of the things. So we have been in this conflict phase. And the first part of it came along when man had messed up this conflict, and the redeeming part of the story, the redemption, the turning point was Jesus. Jesus came and turned everything around for those that will believe in him. The problem is man has sinned. The solution is found in God saving man and man reaching up to God, or God reaching down rather to man in the person of Jesus, and man grasping his hand and saying, I'm receiving the help. I receive you. And understanding that there's going to be a few more bumps and bruises and scratches and scrapes, but he's now holding on to us. And in the end, the denouement, the end of the story, when everything is tied up, is his return when we're all together and there's a new heaven and a new earth. That's the story. There's more details to it than that, but that's it. And I think sometimes we get lost in the details. We try to get lost in the backstory of what's happening. It's just like when people are talking about wars and why did God say do this, do that? Well, the next question is why did Paul tell slave masters how to behave towards their slaves, and why did Paul tell slaves to know how to behave towards their masters? Because there were things that were happening, and he says, here's how you behave in that culture. Here's if this is going on, here's what you do. Here's how to function. Here's the way you should be. It was always about us behaving the way that we should be, believing and behaving the way that we should be in a culture that was anti-God and anti-Jesus. Here's how you do it. Here's what you do. Knowing that trying to find that balance was always going to be the struggle. But ever us walking on that tightrope of balancing to get to the other side, knowing that he's hanging on to us the entire time. It's a lot of stuff today. So anyway, this may prompt some other questions. Make sure that you send them to me. As I said, I will be back this coming Sunday. Obviously, I'm back in town. I'll be back with a new message this coming Sunday. We're so thankful that you watched today. I'm going to let you go a couple of minutes early, and hope and pray that you have a good day. We'll see you soon. Love you all.